I don't think of myself as a difficult person, I'm just used to taking care of myself. When you grow up in a family where favoritism is reserved for someone else, you learn to rely on yourself. I learned that lesson early. My name is Rachel, and I'm 31 years old. I work in finance as an investment analyst, a job that requires precision and careful planning. Some people say I'm too meticulous with money, but I don't see that as a flaw. On the contrary, that very caution has allowed me to save enough to finally pursue my dream. The dream that no one in my family ever thought I deserved. I'm the second daughter in my family. My older sister Laura is 3 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, she has always been a perfect gem. Laura is beautiful, outgoing, charming, and effortlessly wins people over. Since childhood, I had grown accustomed to watching my parents shower her with attention, praise, expensive gifts, high expectations for a brilliant future. I wasn't jealous of her, at least, not anymore, but it was impossible to ignore the stark contrast. One child was treasured like a rare jewel, while the other was merely an afterthought. After graduating college, Laura married Michael, a manager in the construction industry. They have 3 kids: Hannah, 8, Ethan, 5, and Noah, 2. I genuinely love my niece and nephews. They're innocent and sweet in the way all children are. But what I don't love is how Laura constantly complains about her life. She has a family, a devoted husband, 3 healthy children, the kind of life many people dream of. Yet she always finds something to grumble about. Not enough money, not enough space, not enough help. As for me, I haven't settled down yet, and I'm in no rush to do so. I enjoy my independence. Currently, I live in a cozy 1-bedroom apartment in the Chicago suburbs, which I rent at a discounted price, thanks to Emily, my best friend from college. Her family owns a few rental properties, and agreed to let me stay at a lower rate, because they know I always pay on time and never cause trouble. This stability has allowed me to save a significant portion of my income. While my coworkers splurge on fancy dinners, I cook at home. While they upgrade their phones every year, I stick with my old iPhone that works just fine. I don't take extravagant vacations, I don't chase fashion trends, and I don't make impulsive purchases. All of this has been for one goal: to buy a small home in the countryside, where I can work remotely without the noise and chaos of city life. The pandemic changed how my company operates. Before I had to be in the office 5 days a week, but now with remote work becoming the norm, I only need to show up for important meetings. That means I'm no longer tied to the city. I can live anywhere as long as I have a strong internet connection. And the idea of owning a little house where I could grow vegetables, adopt a dog, and slow down my pace of life became more and more appealing. Last week, I opened my bank account and checked my savings balance. I had done this every month for years, but this time was different. I finally had enough for a down payment. That evening, I sat in front of my laptop for hours, scrolling through real estate listings in the countryside. Charming little houses with wide porches, open yards, and peaceful surroundings. I pictured myself living there, sipping coffee on a wooden chair in the morning. Not a luxurious mansion, just a place that was mine. I was lost in this vision of my future when my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I sighed and picked up. "Rachel, don't forget you're coming home for dinner on Saturday," she said, her tone more of a command than an invitation. "Laura and Michael will be there too. Try to be on time for once." I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 p.m. The call lasted less than a minute, but it was enough to remind me of one thing. In my family's eyes, I was still the single woman with nothing better to do than show up whenever they summoned me. I closed my eyes, pushing away the irritation. That was a problem for another time. Right now, I had a dream to chase. I'm not someone who shares personal plans with my family. Not because I have anything to hide, but because I already know how they'll react. If I told my mother I wanted to buy a small house in the countryside, she would immediately try to control my decision. If I told Laura, she would somehow turn it into her own problem. But that night, as the family gathered around the dinner table, I made a crucial mistake. I let my intentions slip. Dinner went as it always did. Laura was busy with the kids, Michael complained about work, Dad read the news on his phone, and Mom hovered around the table, making sure everyone's plates were full. I tried to stay unnoticed. But then, in the middle of the conversation, my mother suddenly turned her gaze to me. "Rachel, you've been glued to your phone since you got here. Who are you texting?" I blinked, realizing I had absent-mindedly been scrolling through home listings on my phone. I could have lied, could have said it was a work email. But instead, I told the truth. "I'm looking at houses," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I'm thinking about buying a small place in the countryside." Silence filled the room, even Hannah and Ethan stopped playing. Mom set her spoon down on the plate with a soft clink. "Buying a house," she repeated, as if I had just said something utterly ridiculous. I nodded. "Yes. I've saved enough for a down payment. I want to find a quiet place where I can work remotely." Laura placed her water glass on the table with a little more force than necessary. "In the suburbs? Alone?" Her voice was full of doubt. "Yeah," I answered, starting to sense the shift in the room's atmosphere. My father cleared his throat. "But why move so far away? There are plenty of options in the city. You should look for a bigger apartment closer to downtown. A young woman like you can't just isolate herself like that." I let out a small, dry laugh. "Dad, I'm 31, and I like the quiet." Mom shook her head. "No. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? If you're going to buy a house, you need to choose a more reasonable place. Something more practical." I frowned. "What do you mean by more practical?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she exchanged a glance with Laura and Michael. One of those silent conversations that spoke volumes. "Rachel, haven't you thought about the future?" she finally asked. "One day you'll settle down, have a family. You'll need a house with enough space. You can't live alone forever." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm buying this house for myself, not for some hypothetical future that may never happen." That's when Laura spoke up, her voice overly enthusiastic. "Actually, you should consider a larger house in the city. There are so many great apartments near good schools. You know, if you had extra rooms, the kids could visit more often. It would be wonderful for them to have their own space when they come to see Aunt Rachel." I took a sip of water, forcing myself to stay calm. "Laura, I don't need a house with extra bedrooms. I just need a place for myself." But Mom wasn't finished. She was now beaming, as if she had come up with the perfect solution. "Do you remember Mrs. Martha's house in Westlake? She's selling it. A 2-story home, 5 bedrooms, a big backyard, right near schools and shopping centers. I already spoke to her. She's willing to give you a great deal." I set my glass down. "Mama, I never said I wanted a big house." "But it's such a great opportunity," she insisted. "And you shouldn't just think about yourself, Rachel." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean by that?" A long pause stretched across the table. I glanced around, noticing the exchanged glances, the unspoken conversation. It hit me then. They had already discussed this before I even arrived. Then Laura spoke, her tone gentle but full of something else. "What Mom means is, if you buy a bigger house, my family could move in with you for a while. Just temporarily, until we can afford our own place." I blinked. "What?" Laura smiled, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Michael and I talked about it. Our apartment is too small and the kids need space. If you bought a bigger house, we could move in, help with expenses. It would be beneficial for both of us." My heart pounded. I turned to Mom. "You think this is a good idea?" She nodded, her expression completely casual. "Of course. Do you know how expensive housing is right now? If you have the means, why not help your family? Isn't that what siblings are supposed to do?" I let out a soft, humorless chuckle, but inside I felt ice creeping into my veins. "So, all this time, no one actually cared about what I wanted. You were only thinking about how I could spend my money on Laura and her family." My father frowned. "Rachel, don't make it sound like we're taking advantage of you." I set my napkin down. If this isn't taking advantage, then what is? The silence in the room was thick and suffocating. Laura looked slightly taken aback, while Mom appeared more annoyed than remorseful. I stood up. I think I've heard enough. And before anyone could stop me, I walked out of the family dinner feeling like I had just narrowly escaped a trap that had been set long before I even arrived. I didn't go back to my parents' house after that dinner. I knew that if I did, they would bombard me with guilt-tripping words, disappointed looks, and the same "family is everything" rhetoric. That really just meant sacrifice for your sister. Instead, I bought a home. One exactly the way I wanted. I didn't inform anyone in my family. I contacted a reliable realtor, reviewed the financial terms, examined every detail about taxes and insurance. After weeks of searching, I found the perfect place. A small, two-bedroom house with a spacious yard, about 45 minutes outside the city. I signed the purchase agreement, made the down payment, and completed all the paperwork within a month. I had planned my future without anyone in my family knowing. But, out of habit, I still went back to my parents' house for Saturday dinner, as usual. As I walked in, I saw that Laura and Michael were already there, their kids running around the living room. Mom was busy in the kitchen, while Dad sat in his armchair with a newspaper in hand. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that tonight would be different. We sat down for dinner. At first everything felt normal. Laura complained about work, Michael grumbled about his boss, and Mom asked about my coworkers, whose names she never remembered. But I sensed something else in the air. An expectation. Then, Mom put down her knife and fork, turning to me with a smile full of meaning. "Rachel, I have great news for you." I looked up, waiting. "Mrs. Martha has finally decided to sell her house. We can close the deal right away if you agree." I blinked. "Mrs. Martha?" "He lives right across the street," Mom said excitedly. "It's a spacious home, 5 bedrooms, a big backyard. We talked to her and she's willing to give you a great price." I set my fork down, feeling a chill run through me. "Wait, you said we?" Mom smiled as if this was nothing unusual. "Your dad, Laura, and I. We discussed it and agreed this is the best choice for you. A house in this neighborhood, close to family, with plenty of space for the future." I looked around the table, catching Laura's eyes. She didn't look surprised at all. If anything, she looked like she had known about this all along. And then, it clicked. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "So you all decided which house I should buy without even asking me?" Dad cleared his throat, setting his newspaper down. "Rachel, don't overreact. We were just thinking about what's best for you." I crossed my arms. "And Laura was part of this discussion too." Laura chuckled, shrugging like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Of course. It's a family matter." I turned back to Mom. "You said we could close the deal if I agreed. What do you mean by that?" She hesitated slightly before sighing, as if I were a stubborn child. "I already put down a deposit, Rachel. We made an advance payment to hold the house." My stomach dropped. "You put down a deposit?" I repeated, my voice tightening with anger. "You need a bigger home," Mom continued, as if this was just a simple matter. "And it would be wonderful for the family to stay close. Laura and Michael could move in with you for a while, just until they find a better solution." I turned to Laura, waiting for her to deny it, to say this wasn't her idea. But she only smiled, completely unfazed. "That's right," Laura said, as if this was the most reasonable plan in the world. "We'll stay with you for a little while, just temporarily, until we can afford our own place. The kids will have their own rooms, and I can help you manage the house." It felt like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just planned my home, they had planned my life, without even bothering to ask if I wanted any of it. I clenched my fists, then forced myself to release them, keeping my voice firm. "You already put down a deposit?" I asked, emphasizing each word. Mom nodded, certain that I would agree. "All you have to do is cancel that plan to buy in the suburbs and we can finalize the paperwork next week." I met her eyes, my voice dangerously calm. "No." Mom frowned. "Rachel, what do you mean?" I stood up, pushing my chair back. No. None of you will be living in my house. Because I already bought one. The silence at the dinner table became suffocating. Dad put his newspaper down, his face darkening. Rachel, what did you just say? I looked them straight in the eye. I already bought a house. A small, 2-bedroom home, 45 minutes outside the city, and I'm not changing my mind. Laura's mouth fell open. My mother looked as if I had just betrayed her. You bought a house without telling your family? Mom practically shrieked. I smirked. Did any of you ask me before deciding which house I should buy? Silence. Then, Mom's voice rose, filled with anger. You need to cancel that contract immediately. We're getting Mrs. Martha's house. No. I cut her off. I'm not canceling anything. And I'm not letting anyone live in my house. Mom shot up from her chair, her face red with fury. You are so selfish, Rachel. You are betraying your own family. I took a deep breath. No, Mom, I said slowly. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. I turned and walked away from the dinner table, leaving behind a room full of shock and outrage. I drove home in silence, my mind blank, but my hands trembled slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. I had spent my whole life accustomed to my family's favoritism, but this went beyond anything I had ever imagined. They didn't just expect me to share with Laura. They had already decided that my home belonged to her and her family. No one asked me. No one saw me as an individual, with a right to make my own decisions. And when I refused, they reacted as if I was the traitor. I thought that walking away from that dinner would be the end of it, that they would be angry for a while, and then let it go. I was wrong. That night, as I changed into my pajamas and sat down on my bed, my phone started ringing non-stop. I glanced at the screen. Mom was calling. I didn't answer. Less than a minute later, the messages started flooding in. Mom, Rachel, you need to reconsider. This is an opportunity for your family. Mom, don't be selfish. Have you even thought about your sister? Dad, we need to talk. Call me back now. Laura, Rachel, you can't do this to your family. The kids need a place to stay. Laura, I know you're upset, but you have to understand we have no other choice. I set my phone down, my heartbeat accelerating. I didn't want to reply. I didn't need to explain myself. But they wouldn't stop. The next morning, my mother showed up at my door. I heard the relentless knocking as I was still sipping my morning coffee. I stood still, not moving to open the door. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder. More persistent. Rachel, I know you're in there. I tightened my grip around my coffee mug, inhaling deeply, trying to stay calm. I didn't want to confront her, not right now. Rachel, open the door, we need to talk. I didn't move. After a while, I heard her sigh in frustration. Then her voice dropped, lower and heavier. If I don't open this door right now, don't blame me when I find another way to teach you a lesson. I closed my eyes. She wasn't going to give up. For the next week, Laura didn't stop calling, texting, or even emailing. When I blocked her number, messages started coming from Michael. Michael, she's really stressed. Can you just talk to her? Laura, I can't believe you're doing this to your family. Laura, the kids don't deserve this, Rachel. Laura, Ethan and Hannah have to share one bed. They don't even have their own space. When I continued ignoring her, she changed tactics. One night, as I was watching Netflix in my living room, my phone buzzed with a message. It was a photo. I opened it. Noah, the youngest, lying in a cramped crib pressed up against Laura and Michael's bed. Laura, look at this. Do you think we want this? I gripped my phone tightly, feeling a slow-burning anger rise in my chest. They didn't have to say it outright, I understood their message loud and clear. They wanted me to feel guilty. They wanted me to believe that if I didn't let them move in, I was the one harming the children. But that wasn't my responsibility. I turned off my phone, tossed it onto the table and tried to focus on my life. But they wouldn't leave me alone. By the 10th day after I made it clear that no one was moving into my house, the relatives started calling. Aunt Martha. Rachel, I just spoke to your mother. Are you really refusing to help your sister? Uncle Greg, your parents did everything for you, now you can't do this one thing for them? Grandma, Rachel, family is everything, you can't just abandon your own blood like this. Even my mom's old friends got involved. Susan, mom's best friend, do you really want to do this to her? None of them cared about my side of the story. They only heard my family's version, where I was painted as the selfish, ungrateful daughter who turned her back on them. I knew that if I responded, if I tried to explain, no one would actually listen. So, I changed my phone number. After enduring hundreds of calls and guilt-tripping messages, I decided to put an end to it. I went to my phone carrier, got a new number, and only gave it to a select few. Trusted colleagues, close friends, and a handful of people who truly understood the situation. Then, I quietly planned my escape. I hired a moving company I had never used before, scheduling them for early mornings so no one in my family would catch on. I specifically chose a small company with no big logos on their trucks, ensuring no one could track down my new address. On moving day, no one knew where I was going. No forwarding address, no phone number to call. I drove to my new home and never looked back. That first night in my little house, I sat on the front porch with a warm cup of tea, staring out at the open yard under the moonlight. No more messages, no more phone calls, no one pounding on my door demanding I reconsider. Just me, and the peace I had fought so hard to earn. I let out a deep, slow breath. My first real breath in weeks. I was free. The first morning in my new home, I woke up to absolute silence. No honking cars, no ringing phone, no one banging on my door, insisting I think about the family. Just the soft golden sunlight filtering through my curtains, the distant chirping of birds, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I pulled back the bedroom curtains and looked out at my backyard. The sky was a perfect blue, and the early morning light bathed the trees in a golden glow. I had escaped. I had left behind the suffocating weight of their expectations and demands. And the best part? I didn't feel guilty. In those first few days, I finally started living for myself. My work thrived like never before. Without constant family interruptions, I could fully concentrate on my investment analyses, leading to sharper decisions and better predictions. Even my boss noticed the change. My reports were flawless, my profit projections nearly spot on. Before long, I was promoted and given a raise. With a better income, I wasn't just covering my expenses with ease, I was expanding my investments. I started learning about real estate, studying ways to optimize my portfolio, and even enrolled in an online course on macroeconomics. But the most valuable part wasn't the money. I met new people, people who knew nothing about my past, who didn't judge me through the lens of my family's twisted narrative. I met Olivia, the owner of a small coffee shop nearby, who always had fascinating stories about life in a small town. I became friends with Daniel, a freelance writer who lived just a few houses away and also worked from home like me. We started meeting in the mornings, taking walks around the neighborhood, chatting about books, economics, and our plans for the future. Gradually, I realized that family isn't just the people you share blood with. Family is the people who respect you, appreciate you, and don't see you as a tool to serve their own needs. Every now and then, I would still come across social media posts from Laura and my mother. Laura frequently posted vague statuses about ungrateful family members and how siblings should help each other instead of abandoning one another. My mother, on the other hand, shared cryptic messages about selfish children, receiving endless sympathetic comments from her friends. I didn't care anymore. Once upon a time, I might have felt hurt, felt the need to explain myself or defend my choices. But now? I knew that nothing I did would ever be enough for them, unless I sacrificed myself completely. I no longer read their guilt-tripping messages. I no longer cared about their passive-aggressive remarks. I unfollowed them, blocked anyone who couldn't stop interfering in my life. And strangely enough, I didn't feel sad. I only felt relieved. One afternoon, I sat in the wooden chair on my front porch, sipping a warm cup of tea as I gazed at the garden I had started tending. Spring was approaching, and the vegetables I planted were beginning to thrive. I had bought a few flowering plants, arranging them around the yard to add a touch of color. For the first time in my life, I had a place that was truly mine. A space no one could invade, a life no one could control. I glanced at my phone on the table beside me. No messages from Laura. No missed calls from my mother. No guilt-ridden emails from distant relatives. Just me, and the freedom I had fought for. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. For the first time in my life, I truly felt at peace. Rachel's story reflects a reality that many people face. The burden of family expectations and unreasonable financial obligations. Not everyone is born into a family that respects their boundaries or values them as individuals. Sometimes, saying no and choosing your own path is necessary for self-preservation. Rachel had the courage to break free from toxic ties, assert her independence, and build a life of peace and freedom. Her story is a powerful reminder that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who truly respect and care for you. What do you think about Rachel's story? Was she too harsh, or did she make the right choice to protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more insightful stories about family and life.